Hi there and welcome to the latest episode of Craig Houston Talks To, and I've got a great guest for this one. This man is an ex-SNP Cabinet Minister, nonetheless, Alex Neil. So Alex, thank you very much for joining me today.
Pleasure.
We met before and it was an enjoyable experience, and for somebody that was maybe in a different argument on one of the big things in Scottish politics, I think it's great that we can chat and go on, to be honest with you. So it's an important thing I'm here to talk to you about, and I've done a podcast a few months ago about a case where it was basically a land dumping issue, where the couple had stuff put in their land illegally. That turned into a court case. There was a lot of stuff to get sorted out, and during that podcast your name came up and you were taken in as a witness for one party in this argument. But that party never put you in front of the judge. And it was like a bit strange. So, the details of the case and how it came about, they're all covered in the other podcast. I'll put a link to that so people can piece it all together. But what happened? It's sort of layman's terms that day, because it sounded really peculiar to me that you should have this. And you were a cabinet minister at the time, am I right?
Yeah. Well, basically, I wasn't there as a cabinet minister. I was there as the MSP because I represented these people, this couple, as their MSP. And basically, put it in context, they came to me about the illegal dumping on their ground of toxic material, which came from a school that was being demolished in the area. And I contacted the company who did the dumping of this material, and they actually admitted to doing it. A director of the company actually came to see me and said they were willing to do some kind of compromise, although that offer was later withdrawn. But he was very upfront and said they had done it wrongly. It was based on wrong information, etc., 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 and was basically doing a mea culpa. So anyway, no agreement was reached, and eventually it went to court in Edinburgh. And I obviously was a material witness because I was directly involved, and I offered to give evidence on behalf of my constituents because I believe they had suffered a serious injustice. And it was agreed by the QC at the time that I would be on first. Number one, because I was a key witness, and because the admission of guilt had come to me personally, and obviously it was important for me to tell the court that firsthand, but also just for practical reasons. I was in Parliament in the afternoon, and therefore, if I was going to appear that day, I had to appear early on, and it was agreed I would be the first witness. And I hung about outside the court with the couple and waited and waited and waited. And instead of calling me, they called the man of the couple, the husband of the couple. And they never called me at all. And eventually at lunchtime I had to go, and they said I didn't need to come back. I was no longer needed. No explanation was ever given. And the case actually then eventually, when a ruling was made, it was ruled in favour of the company who had done the damage, not in favour of the couple. So I think it's a terrible injustice. And as a result of it, not just the actual proceedings themselves, but there was a number of issues that flowed from it, one of which I think was very important, and that is that we found out later that one of the lawyers representing the company was represented by someone who was part of the family, extended family, of the judge who was sitting in judgment. And that was never, ever declared, that interest. So an aside to this was I actually then became very much in favour of legislation to govern judges' interests, so that like MSPs and MPs, they had to declare any interests and everybody knew where they were coming from, something that still hasn't happened.
Yeah, because that's quite that's a great comparison, because if you're an MSP and, for example, you have your daughter or your niece working for you in an office, then you would declare that.
Well, you wouldn't, because you wouldn't be allowed to. The rules in the Parliament are that any close relative cannot work for you, unlike at Westminster, where they can have close relatives working for them and often do, but in the Scottish Parliament it's not allowed.
Didn't realise that. Need to remind that to all my family if I'm successful getting to Hollywood.
Absolutely.
I can't give you a job. That's a great excuse. So, yeah, but that's bizarre. So there's no protection in law. So you could be a judge and you could rule on a case that was being defended by your son.
Yes.
Now, that's bonkers.
Absolutely.
And that was kind of, when I done the original podcast, the story is a horrible story.
Yeah.
But what it highlighted was shortfalls and shortcomings in our judiciary system.
Yeah.
And that's a big one.
Yeah.
So are you saying that there's nothing, you don't even need to declare it?
No, they don't. At the moment, any interest they have, I mean, for example, a number of years ago, there was a long-running story, I think it was the Sunday Mail that laid on it, about interests that serving judges had financial interests in certain companies in various countries and all the rest of it. And there was a big hoo-ha about them being able to rule on any matter, even without declaring an interest. And my view is, and it was promised by Nicola Sturgeon but never delivered, that we should have a Judicial Interests Act passed in the Parliament so that anyone in the judiciary in Scotland had to have a register of interests open to the public so that people knew if there was any potential conflict of interest. Of course, it avoids the potential conflict of interest because no judge in the right mind would actually sit in judgment on a case where they could be accused of, rightly or wrongly, where they could be accused of having a pecuniary interest in that particular case. And this was an example where, to me, if there's any connection whatsoever, it should be declared. I'm not saying the guy who was representing the company could not represent the company because he was entitled to do so. But at least everyone should have known that that was the case.
And during this case, through talking to the couple, there was loads of different sheriffs and judges had touched this because it went from, I'm going to say Lanark, but it might have been Hamilton. It went from like a sheriff's level up to, ended up at court session.
Yeah.
So obviously it'd been handled by a lot of different people.
Yes.
And the judge in question, was he one that done quite a lot of work on the case, or was he sort of peripheral in his dealings with it?
Well, at that time, that was the first time he had judged on the case.
And this was the last judge?
Well, there's been two or three, but the incident I'm talking about when I was called as a witness and then wasn't called as a witness, that was the first time any judge at that level had presided over this case.
Yeah.
But the other thing, looking at this more generally, one of the other things that came out of it is no lawyer that we approached was prepared to take on the case to go back to challenge the ruling. This couple really, it was as if they were a marked man and woman in the legal profession in Scotland. And they've had to go south to try and get legal representation in the fight to try and get justice. And there's something wrong when that happens. There is something deeply uneasy and immoral that anyone cannot get a lawyer to represent them on what should have been a substantive case. And it makes me wonder, what forces have been at work to stop that a couple subsequently getting the legal advice, the legal support that they would need to be paying for. It wouldn't be free to take their case back to the court of session to try and get the original decision reversed. Yeah.
And I think through speaking to them, I don't think it's trying to change the actual decision as such. That the important part is what the decision was and what was to be paid out, and it's led to other things in their life. So it's that part there that...
Well, I think it's more important than that. I think there's a fundamental principle here. We had a case where a company of its own volition admitted to illegal dumping on this property. Now, the couple had outline planning permission, and one estimate was that the land was worth £3 million. Well, once you put toxic waste on it, and the second point here is, if you put toxic waste on my land, under environmental laws, it's me that's responsible, not the guy who dumps the toxic waste. And we need legislation to change that. I mean, that's another injustice that was shown up by this particular case.
See the case, it was incredible that there was so many things to it that were just bizarre. Absolutely. And highlighted issues within issues, is it?
Exactly. And so when people say to me, we've got a great Scottish criminal justice system in Scotland, I disagree. I think there's a lot wrong with it. And of course, as we campaigned for justice for this couple, many other people approached us because of the injustices that they felt they had suffered through the way the justice system works or does not work in Scotland. And I actually think it's high time the Scottish Government held a completely independent review of the entire criminal justice system and how it's operating, because I think there's loads of things that need to be addressed to ensure that people actually do get justice.
No, I agree with you. And Roger Livermore has done quite a lot of work on this. I've seen a lot of the things he's written about it and written to the government about.
Yeah.
And I've got a theory that may be ridiculous. But he's suggesting that basically the whole way the judiciary is set up in Scotland is actually illegal because of this tie-in with the head of the advocacy, the judiciary and the Cabinet Minister, and it's not too separate.
It's not illegal, but it's wrong. I mean, basically, the Lord Advocate traditionally has fulfilled two roles. One is as the Director of Public Prosecutions and pursuing criminal cases, and the other is as the legal advisor to the Scottish Government. Now, it's very clear in my mind that there is potential conflict of interest between those two roles. I mean, the Alex Salmond case is a good example of that. The Lord Advocate sits in the Cabinet, and very often, although they're not always an MSP, in fact, since the Scottish Parliament was created, very few of the Lord Advocates, I don't think any of the Lord Advocate was a serving MSP at the time they were Lord Advocate. But they tend to be of the same political persuasion as the First Minister, the serving First Minister. Not always. Sometimes they are not of any political persuasion particularly, but some of them are of a particular political persuasion. Now, if you're a Director of Public Prosecutions, you should not be politically prejudiced, in my view, in any way and have any particular affiliations or loyalties. But it's this conflict, between the interests of the government and the interests of justice and the people who are being tried. And I think there is now a large body of opinion both within the justice system in Scotland, but also in the political community and in the wider community, that the time is now long overdue to split the role of the Lord Advocate between being the Director of Public Prosecutions and the legal advisor to the Scottish Government. There should be two separate jobs there, two separate remits.
Yeah, and although that, as you suggested there, there's been a lot of times where, particularly in recent times, that the Lord Advocate has had the same opinions politically as those govern the country. But they have at times told them the professional opinion that they didn't like.
Oh, aye.
And they've ignored it.
Aye.
And, you've got I think it was the referendum one was one of them, and Nicola Sturgeon went down to the Court of Sessions. You had the case with the Women Won't Waste. I think I've given the wrong title there. Do forgive me. Who had a great battle to get common sense back in the room to say, well, a man's a man's, a woman's a woman.
Aye, that's right.
Now, so there are instances where the Scottish Government's been given advice by the Lord Advocate, which was contrary to their beliefs, and they've just went ahead and ignored the Lord Advocate.
Well, no, not quite ignored it. I mean, if you take for example the issue, does the Scottish Parliament have the constitutional power to organise an independent referendum without a Section 30 order from Westminster? Now, the advice was always absolutely clear since the day and hour the SNP got into government in Scotland. The legal advice on that was very clear. The Scottish Parliament did not have that power. Funnily enough, it has the power to have a referendum to ask the Scottish people if they think the Scottish Parliament should have the power to have a referendum, because you're not actually changing the Constitution. But I think they should exercise that particular power to ask the Scottish people, because I think there have been overwhelming yes, even amongst some people who are against independence.
Because that's interesting, because that's a totally different question.
Absolutely.
Aye.
And the advice Alex Salmond got was that was constitutionally, under the current constitutional arrangement, it was a perfectly legal and constitutionally correct thing for him to be able to do as First Minister, as the Scottish Government. And I found it ironic earlier this year when Ash Regan from the Alba Party put such a bill to the Parliament and the SNP deliberately scuppered it. I would have thought it was in their interest to have such a referendum. Personally, I would have held such a referendum, and I would have held it on the day of the Scottish Parliament elections next year. And I think that would have put Stammer and his party behind the eight ball.
And what you said there's actually a very, very fair point. Listen, I'm a unionist, right? But somebody said to me one day in a
We all
public...
make mistakes in life, Craig.
You'd have thought you'd have matured by now, Alex. Right? No, but somebody said to me in a public forum about it was more than that. It was probably about a year ago. It was during the general election. And they said, Craig, would you like the notion of independence just to be wiped out of Scotland? And I went, not at all. And I went, because see if that's the type of society you want, when does it become the things that you find important become that you're not allowed those notions?
That's right.
I says, what I think we need to do is we need to be more grown up in how we deal with it.
Aye.
Because my opinion is for far too long we've had people in government where all they wanted to do is use it to blame everybody else and actually campaign for independence. Because every week you'll see something else come out with the SNP saying, but that's Westminster's fault, that's Westminster's fault. And I've actually got quite a strong opinion on this. If we cannot, now I'm not saying abolish Holyrood, by the way, but some people are. They tend to be unionists, right? And what I'm saying is, well, I don't think Holyrood's ran the way it should over the last few years. So it's kind of difficult to say is it worthwhile or not, because I kind of think to even use it the last maybe 10 years would be an unfair comparison, because all we've done is since the referendum is say everything's Westminster's fault. What I would love Holyrood to do, even for one cycle, is to stop it. Stop campaigning. Not saying you don't have the notion that you want to be independent. If that's your thing, that's your thing, right? But it's not got to be the main driver. And what we should do for 5 years, at least 5 years, is take the Book of Devolved Powers and don't use it, abuse it, wring every bit of power out there to anything that can make Scotland a better place, and take everything to the nth degree. And if we do that for one cycle and Scotland does become a better place, then you don't need to abolish Holyrood. If you genuinely use every power you've got and you still can't influence Scotland, what's the point in Holyrood? You better be an old Scottish office, right? If you genuinely can't, because I don't believe what people are saying to me is Scotland can't do anything for its own benefit. We control health, we control education, we control these things. People say, oh, but we don't control power, for example, energy. I say, well, what happened when Nicola Sturgeon pawned our offshore wind leases for 680 or 860 million? I can't remember the figure, but it wasn't a lot. That was us. That was the Scottish Government. And people go, no, that was the Crown Estate. I said, yeah, but the Crown Estate is a body who's run by the ministers of Scotland, and any revenue from that comes back into Scotland. Because it's got the name Crown on it, some people think, well, that must go to Charles.
25%. No, it's no nonsense. 25% does go to Charles of Crown Estate income.
In Scotland?
Yes.
That's not what it says in the Scottish Government website.
No, but the Crown Estate's part of the UK Crown Estate, and the agreement is that
I looked at it recently yesterday because somebody was having a conversation about it. And I'm going like, so we can, and forgetting about that part, right? But the main part is we can control stuff. And for too long, I think certain people get up in the morning and their main thing is keeping their job, not what's best for people. And I kind of don't like that anymore. I think we need to go to work every morning if you're an MSP and remind yourself that you are there for the people of Scotland, not the people that voted for you. Yes, primarily for your constituents, but in general you've got to do what's best for everybody. And if we even had 5 years where we just went, let's just wring it dry and not start, we can't deal with that, as Westminster's fault. And the things that you do are peculiarly strange to me. I kind of try to apply common sense and logic, and the reason being I'm not very clever. So if you apply common sense and logic, it's a good starting point. And when you hear a government say things like, we've got a national housing crisis last year, which means we don't have enough houses in Scotland, and then tells Westminster that they're demanding to write their own visas, you think, well, but you've just told us we don't have enough houses in the country. Why would you want to bring more people here? And and this is where people get confused. They say, well, you don't want immigration. I say, of course I want immigration. You don't want asylum? Of course I want asylum. I think anybody who says we don't want asylum doesn't have a heart. Because when you've got people in other countries with terrible issues, like a 22-year-old I know in Manchester called Baraka, he came from Ivory Coast. No, he didn't. He came from Congo, two totally separate places. He wasn't even born there. His mother and father fled there 3 years before he was born, got to an immigration camp. He was born in the camp, and for the first 14 years of his life, he spent in that camp before eventually getting asylum in the UK. You see the people that are coming here, fake asylum, and are claiming that they're only asylum seekers. You're putting these poor kids further. That's why he's 17 years in a camp, or his family were. But you've got to be realistic and say, well, you've just told us the middle to tail end of last year that we've got a national housing crisis. And now you're telling us you're demanding for Westminster that you want more people to come here. That doesn't make sense. And it's as if it's just blame politics all the time and that culture of these people are bad. Now, listen, I'm no fan of Westminster. I can't remember the last time I had a government where I thought, they're all right, right? But you can't blame your neighbour for everything. You've got to at some point take responsibility. And we tend not to do it. We used to do that.
I'll try and get a word in edgeways, will I?
I'm forgetting you're the guest. I'm doing that thing.
Let me start and do this in reverse from the point, because you raised a lot of points there.
Yes,
so let me cover as much as I can. First of all, there is a link between solving the housing crisis and having more immigration. If you look at the state of the Scottish economy at the moment, if you take the construction industry, for example, there is a shortage of about 13,000 skilled workers, mainly in the wet trades. And that's just now even without an expanded housing programme. And we need a very expanded housing programme to tackle the so-called housing emergency. So there is a genuine case for saying it would help enormously to have an expanded housing programme if we had the skills. And in some of the skills, the best, quickest way to get those skills is to have people immigrate into Scotland with those skills. If you look at the health service, for example, we have a dire shortage of certain types of doctor and nurses and other specialists. And quite frankly, in the short to medium term, the only way you'll solve that crisis is by bringing people from out with Scotland into Scotland and hope that they will stay here long term and help us solve that problem. So very often it's difficult to maximise your impact with the devolved powers without having a control over certain reserve powers. And that's an example. We have a major skills shortage issue right across Scottish society. We still have some skills shortages in the North Sea, in the oil and gas industry, skill shortages in the building trades, skill shortages in education. Can you get maths teachers practically anywhere? Skill shortages in the health service. And part of the solution is to bring people into Scotland who have those skills. So that there's a genuine point there. Point number one. Let me now go back to the start of your comments. I agree with you. I don't fall out with people because they're not in favour of independence and they're unionists. They're entitled to their point of view the way that I'm entitled to my point of view. And at a more fundamental level, when I was an MSP, I always made a point of having friends across the aisle, people in other parties, and we'd sit down and talk to each other, go out for a beer and all the rest of it, and some of them are very, very good friends of mine, as good a friends as some of my folk, who are in favour of independence are friends of mine. And democracy cannot work unless those in the parliament in a country with different points of view work together for the greater good. Now, they have different views on what the greater good is. But for example, when I was the health secretary, one of the points I made was that 95% of health policy is non-party political. About 5% there is differences between the parties. And I actually pulled together a meeting of the Labour representative, the Tory representative, the Liberal representative and all the rest of it, and said, let us work together. And actually, the Tories were the best at that. They came forward with a very serious proposal, and they said a high priority for them was to hire 500 additional district nurses. And I looked at that, and I agreed with them once we did the analysis. So not only did I adopt their policy, I admitted publicly, and we said in a press release, and I invited the then Tory health spokesman, Jackson Carlaw, a very decent person indeed, Tory MSP, former leader of the Scottish Tories, and Jackson, I included Jackson's quotations in the official press release, and I publicly thanked Jackson and his deputy Nanette Millen for all the work they had done. I gave them a week's advance notice of the announcement. It did not leak at all, and I couldn't say that if I'd told my colleagues in the cabinet. Some of them might have leaked it, but there we go. So I agree with you. We need. It's a democracy we live in.
Yeah.
Nobody has a monopoly of wisdom. Nobody has
Correct,
the right, monopoly of being right. The final general point I would make, because there's a lot in what you said in your party political broadcast there, Craig. But the final point I would make is, well, two things. First of all, the vast bulk of the politicians I've ever met, and I've been in politics for 60 years. I joined the Labour Party when I was 15, when Harold Wilson was the leader. The vast majority of people involved in politics are, in my view, from all the parties, are in it for the right reasons.
Yeah.
You get the odd bad apple, and very often the system shakes out the bad apples. Maybe not always, but 90% of the time the bad apples get exposed and then ditched, quite frankly, by the system. But the second thing is that the Scottish Parliament, I am one of the most critical people of the fact that the Scottish Parliament has not exercised its powers to the maximum, its existing powers. A very good example of that is land reform. We should have had much more land reform in Scotland to break up these big Highland estates and the power that goes with them, for example. The housing emergency, at the moment, one of the things we should be doing is, in my view, mobilising the pension fund money, the billions of pension fund money available for investment in housing. I believe we could easily double, over a 3-year period, double the house building programme. And I've got proposals into the Scottish Government to that effect, although I'm sorry to say so far they've done nothing about it. But the point is, I think Scotland would be not in such a good position as it is had we not had the Parliament for the last 25 years. Mm-hmm. But having said that, Jimmy Maxton, the Labour MP in the 30s and 40s, used to say a Scottish Parliament would achieve more in 5 years for Scotland than Westminster could achieve in 25 years. And he was right. But particularly in the last 10 years, we have not delivered. We have not used the powers to their maximum, and there's been a lot of promises made, especially by Nicola. Talks a good game, but she didn't deliver. She didn't turn the dial on independence. She didn't turn the dial on education. She, quite frankly, didn't turn the dial on health or in housing. So I am absolutely one with you. I don't think the Scottish Parliament has done nearly as much as it could and should have done, but it's done a lot more than would have been done under the status quo. Yeah,
I think the Scottish office done all right for a long time, but you're right when you think about it, and that's right, it should be able to do more. But it's not recently.
Well, remember, under Mrs Thatcher, Scotland became a guinea pig for the poll tax. Yeah. I mean, that was absurd. That was an insult to a whole nation. And even a lot of Tories, Scottish Tories, were absolutely appalled by that.
That wasn't right, but the Scottish Government's trying to make us a lot of guinea pigs for a lot of other nonsense, like your kids can decide what sex they are.
Well,
do you know what I mean? So they
got that wrong.
100%. But there's a couple of things there that you mentioned. One that's really, really important to me, and that is young people. Right? I've spent 17 years as a volunteer coach coaching kids, and you learn a lot getting getting involved with them. And I think there's a lot of bad kids, but there's a lot of good kids, and anybody that says they're all one of the other's nuts.
Yeah.
But one stat, and you'll be able to tell me if this is right or not. I saw a stat that I've not dug, but it said something in the region of 1 in 5 young people never contribute to the national purse, i.e. they'll never work.
There's roughly 100,000 children in Scotland who are not in education, employment or training. Now, some of them are not in either any of those because they're caring for their parents. There are some, there are genuine reasons for it, but there are some they're just not getting the opportunities. I mean, I know of children through my grandchildren. I know of kids who, quite frankly, at the academies in Ayr, where the standard of teaching is very good, but there are some kids who, by the time they're 14, boys particularly, are quite frankly, bored because they're not academic. They want to do something technical. And I think we need to tweak the education system to deal with kids like that. And I know of some kids, I know in one in particular, I'm obviously not going to mention any names or anything, but he looked as though he was going to somebody I know who looked as though at the age of 14 he could end up in a life of trouble, came from a very decent family, but was utterly bored at school and, he didn't behave himself at school. And now he's found a vocation in life as, he's got a job involving his hands, and he's very good. And he was handpicked by an employer when the employer saw him, in what he did. And now he's on a career path. He's going to he's on up an apprenticeship, and that guy is working day and night. He's one of the hardest workers I've ever seen at that age. So I think that you're absolutely right. We are not doing enough for our kids, and particularly those kids who are bored with school and need particular help. For example, one of the good things we can learn from education systems elsewhere is that those kids, very often kids who've got some kind of illness or long-term disability, or kids who are just living in a very poor area, their mum and dad can't afford to take them on holidays and all the rest of it. If you pay for additional tutoring for these kids, because very often they're very talented. Their genes are no different from the kids that are doing very well. It's very often poverty and bad housing and sometimes poor health that are the contributing factors. So we need to give these kids some extra help, whether it's extra tutoring, extra career advice, extra resources.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of them that would accept that.
Yes.
Right? But there's also some who could maybe benefit from that, who maybe wouldn't even consider it. And where I am with this whole thing is, I think we need to energise our youth, and we need to inspire them.
Yeah.
And actually, it came up one night. I couldn't believe. Now, I understand skill shortages. That's that's a very valid point, and anybody with half a brain can understand that, right? So what we need to do as a people is
match the kids to the skill shortages.
It's no rocket science,
exactly.
And the one that got me was, it came up, there was an advert for train drivers. We've got a shortage of train drivers.
Yeah. Good money, by the way.
70 grand a year just after
Earning
training,
not
right?
nearly as much as you.
Right. So somebody said to me quite rightly, and I love this, because I'm standing for election in Holyrood in May, God spare him, and somebody said, well, what would you do about that, Craig, if you were in Parliament? I said, I could probably help solve that in a month. Well, what would you do? I said, well, I would ask somebody, and it would depend who was in power at the time. If I get a job as a regional guy for Glasgow, right? Say, how many high schools have we got in Glasgow? I don't know. Is it 30, 40? I don't know what the number is, right? I'd say to the person in power, the government, because that'll not be me, I'll not be the First Minister. Can I take your transport guy, please, once a week for the next 4 weeks? What for? Well, I'm going to take him and somebody at the train industry and go and visit every high school in Glasgow and ask for an assembly with everybody over 13 and say, can we just talk to you about the train drivers? And say, this is this guy and this is what the job does and our country needs train drivers. Now, if you talk to the kids in a manner that they understand and they go, 70 grand a year? You could buy a new PlayStation every week if you want, son, right? I guarantee you that you could inspire at least one kid per school to at least consider being a train driver.
Can I say, this has already been done at some scale a few years ago by Jim McCall, the industrialist.
Yeah.
Now, Jim put in a lot of money from his own company to help kids who were failing at school. Yeah. And particularly, as you say, at the age of 13, 14, taking them out of the mainstream system and putting them into a special opportunity-filled area where they were introduced to the world of work, they were helped with any problems they had, they even get transported to school and all the rest of it. Yeah. And initially he got support. This was in Glasgow he did it, but I think some of the kids came from out with Glasgow, but most of them I think came from Glasgow, and it was highly successful in the education department in Glasgow, I think I'm right in saying, basically withdrew support from it, and Jim was no longer able to do it. Now, if I were the Minister for Education, and there's no chance of that happening now, although I maybe have a better chance of being an Education Minister than you have of winning the election, Craig.
There's another one.
I'm only joking. But seriously, if I was a Minister for Education, I would phone up Jim McCall and ask him to come in and give him all the support he needed from the Scottish Government to rerun his project, starting with the poorest areas.
Yeah, and I think, see if we'd done that today,
Yes.
How long would it take for us to have a society where we didn't have skill shortage? And just before you answer that, just another thing to throw into that. See, when I was a kid, which takes some memory, right? It's a long time ago now. People wanted to be train drivers, or I want to be a nurse, or I want to be a such and such. And I hate saying something negative about kids, and I hope it doesn't come across that way, but I don't see that today. When I deal with hundreds of kids over the course of a year, and you have those conversations, and it's I want to be a YouTuber, which is crazy because I'm a YouTuber. Don't ever want to be a YouTuber. Or this instant success story. I want to be a football player. I want to be a pop star. I want to be a model. Whereas back in my day, yes, you had people that were dreaming of being, famous whatevers, and that's kind of fine. You've got to have people with crazy ambitions. You aim for the stars, you'll hit the moon. But that, I want to be a nurse, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a fireman, it kind of isn't there anymore.
Well, the other thing is, and you're right, and I think that the debate around artificial intelligence is making this situation worse. I mean, there's now clear evidence, not just in Scotland, but right across Europe and in North America, for example, that the artificial intelligence now is replacing a lot of the graduate jobs. So kids are coming out of university, maybe as data controllers or whatever, and there's no longer any jobs for them because artificial intelligence is doing it all. And I think this debate around artificial intelligence, I don't think any government's got a grip on its consequences, its limitations, its opportunities, and also some of the dangers of artificial intelligence. And I think governments need to work together to try and properly assess the impact of artificial intelligence on the labour market, on people, on skills, on universities and all the rest of it. Because I think it's demotivating. When a young person's reading this, well, why would I go to university? By the time I graduate, the job won't be there. So what should we be encouraging young kids to do? Because, when I was at university, you were guaranteed a job almost at the end of it. So there's a big issue now, not just coming down the track, it's already with us, about the implications of artificial intelligence, not just in young kids, for the whole of society, but particularly for young kids.
Yeah. Well, when I was a child, I was born in Linwood, in that whole town. I think my dad was the only guy in the street that didn't work at the car plant.
Right.
He was a draftsman. He worked down the Clyde as in the shipyard. So I seen the devastation that was. And I remember Austin, I can't remember what the company was called, it was British Leyland at the time, but I think the Maestro came out, and the advert for the Maestro was these robots building these cars.
Yeah.
And that would have been early 80s, mid-80s, and it must have been early 80s. And there was this fear that robots were going to take over the world. And it kind of didn't work out that way. However, when I see videos, like I did last night when I was catching up on my social media, of AI robots doing incredible things, and I'm scared not just of the possibility of them taking jobs off people. It's the dangers it could have to mankind, because these things are highly intelligent.
Absolutely.
And they teach them. There was a guy, what he was doing is, they've got this robot that was walking along the road quite fine, and it had AI intelligence to allow it to learn itself. And what he started off by shoving it, and the robot fell over. But then it learned, well, I do that again, I know how to compensate. And within 4 or 5 takes, he was actually kicking the thing, and it wouldn't fall over, and you go, that's scary.
But on the other side of the coin, there's also major advantages. For example, already the AI is helping to make major advances on the diagnosis of certain cancers, which is going to allow people, to have much longer lives than would otherwise be the case. There's a lot of pluses and a lot of minuses. And if you look at the history of the Industrial Revolution, and right even further back than that, every time you get a major change in technology, for example, when we moved from an agricultural society to an industrial society, remember the Luddites, they smashed up the machines because they thought that it would leave them with no jobs. Now, in actual fact, what happened was, in these revolutions, not only were there more jobs, but there were better jobs generally, and better paid jobs and better conditions and all the rest of it. And if you look at the jobs we have today, I mean, we're sitting quite near to Prestwick Airport doing this interview. Now, if you think Prestwick Airport didn't exist before 1920 or thereabouts, and if you think of the jobs in the last 105 years that Prestwick Airport has, and is still with the aerospace park contributing to the Ayrshire and Scottish economy, That's as a result of technological change and advances. And if you look at the wider aerospace and aircraft industry and tourism and all the rest of it, the number of people they employ worldwide is huge. I mean, we're talking millions if you take the total global, the global total. So hopefully AI will repeat that in the sense that it will create as many jobs, hopefully better jobs than the ones it replaces. Yeah. But we don't know yet if that's the case. Maybe this is the one that's different and won't create any or significantly more jobs. I think it will, because I still don't think even the best AI can totally replace the human brain, quite frankly. But time will tell. But that's why we need a proper assessment of its limits, its opportunities, its benefits, its costs.
It's quite interesting to consider, and the irony in what I'm about to say, man does not understand the human brain 100%.
No.
Right? Wouldn't it be ironic if AI figured it out for us?
Well, it would be very ironic.
It can do quite a lot. So, yeah, so what I'm saying is, see if my nirvana, where we suddenly be able to inspire our kids to, work, because a lot of people, unfortunately, there's a lot of people you've described that carers and have learning difficulties, disabilities, where working is not an option for them. I totally get that. There are other people where it is an option and they decide not to. That's factual. Yes. We can't ignore that. And these are the kids that I think we need to inspire.
Yes.
And we need to get them because there's good kids there. And
yeah.
I was on a podcast last week, a week before, and what the guy said was, Sean had said that, there's no opportunity for people. And I said, well, Sean, I'm going to look at that from 180 degrees here. I think that's disingenuous to people that I know who are in this group that you believe have got no opportunity, who have become successful.
Yeah.
And those, even if it's one person, that suggests that your notion that there's zero opportunity is untrue.
Yes.
So we need to change the narrative there. If you tell people there's no opportunity, guess what? Some of them might believe you.
I think the opportunities are changing. That's the point. And, I mean, one of the things that's a job that's just emerged in the last 10, 15 years is being an influencer. In social media. Yeah. Now, I'd never heard of it until my granddaughters pointed it out. But a lot of people are making a lot of money as influencers. And probably we don't even know exactly the number of people. But that's an example of where social media, which has had a major impact on how we all relate to each other and communicate with each other and all the rest of it. But it has created jobs as well. No doubt there's some jobs that it has destroyed. I mean, the newspaper industry, probably social media, has played a significant part in curtailing the newspaper industry, and a lot of jobs have been lost in recent years in the newspaper industry. But there's a lot of jobs being created in social media, which are jobs that we couldn't have imagined as being jobs 5 or 10 years ago. So I think that's why we need proper assessment of where we're
there
going.
Are opportunities. We just need to find
absolutely.
them. You're right. I mean, I wouldn't be doing this 3 years ago.
No.
Never mind 30 years ago.
That's right. Absolutely.
The internet didn't exist then. So
that's
every time, and it ties in with what you were saying earlier, when you have advancements in technology and industry, it starts creating...
Well, one of the fastest growing businesses, I get the impression anyway, not just in Scotland but worldwide, is podcasts. I mean, the podcast is a fairly new invention, and they're growing up like mushrooms all over the place.
There's 5 people in this room, and 2 of them have got a podcast.
Absolutely. And I was out for dinner on Saturday night with friends, and one of them said he actually the channel he watches most now, he's retired, is YouTube. He says you can get anything you want on YouTube. So the world is changing very fast.
And I'll tell you another strange thing that blew me away when I figured it out. When you put your stuff on YouTube, the analytical data you get back is just crazy.
Yes.
Right, it's phenomenal. And it can tell me who watches, as in what country, right down to city, sex, age, whether they're watching on a phone or a TV or a laptop or a tablet, right? I mean, it's incredible data. And if I was to have guessed, somebody told me 3 years ago, you're going to have a podcast with 80,000 subscribers, I'd have laughed at them, right? But if they were then to say to me, how do you think these 80,000 people are broken down? And how will they watch it? I would say, Probably the majority of them will be under 50. They'll be about 30 to 40-year-old, and they'll probably watch it on their phones. Over 60% of the people that watch my channel are over 55.
Is that right?
Yeah. And there's 4 different ways of watching. You get mobile, laptop, tablet, or TV.
Yeah.
So they should all be 25% each.
Yeah.
No, 40%, the biggest number, watching TVs.
Aye.
And that blew me away.
On YouTube.
Yeah,
Aye.
people get a big screen like that in the middle of the living room.
Yeah.
And now that I'm out and about and I'm doing a lot of things outside now, and I'm talking to people and meeting people, and I say, "Well, how do you go, oh, great, I love your channel, and
Yeah.
you're great, and blah, blah, blah." I say, "How do you watch it?" I say, "It's replaced the news."
Aye.
We'll sit down and we'll go, "What's Craig said today at
Aye.
6 o'clock?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And you think, well, that's phenomenal. But also with that, there becomes a responsibility.
Yes.
And we can't slag the news and say that they drive narratives and then become something that drives narratives.
Aye, that's right. That's right.
Are you with me? So
Yeah.
I believe I've got a social responsibility to try and not do that,
Yeah.
which is why I think I look at a lot of different topics. You know, I'll
Yes.
have my own opinion on those topics.
Aye, absolutely.
But I try to show balance and fairness.
Yeah.
And these things are credible. But see if we said, right, let's go back and call today day one, right? And you and I, some maniacs decided me and you are going to run the country, right?
Yeah.
And we went, right, see the stuff that we agree on, well, let's look at them first,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
See with quick fixes, and we say, right, well, we both agree that the youth thing's something that we really need to
Yes.
try and inspire. And let's get McCall in and let's do all those things. How long would it take from there to get to a place where we're getting better? How long would it take to see the fruits of your labour on that?
I think it'd be reasonably quick because, you know, we know who these kids are. If you went into any school and spoke to the teachers, they could identify the kids that would benefit from that kind of support right away. They wouldn't need a computer or anything to tell them that. And if you had the programme ready to go, you know, if you reinvented Jim McCall's programme, for example, then you could start it very quickly. And I mean, one of the things from talking to Jim McCall, the impact this had on the kids who did benefit from that school that he set up was enormous, particularly in terms of their ability to get a job when they left school. And I suspect if you looked at those kids now, they're on a good career path, you know, because they've got off to a good start. And if you got off to a good start in life, adult life, your chances of success are much greater than if you're struggling. You know, but the million kids across the UK who are not in education, employment or training, you know, start with them because they're the kids that probably, if they are not able to do it because they're having to care for a mum or dad, let's put some carer support in so that the kid can live a good life and you know, realise some of the opportunities open to them. You know, there's a lot that can be done that's not being done, and we need to be much more imaginative and much less bureaucratic in our approach, you know, because every family's different and every individual's different. So these programmes have to be flexible enough to cater for a wide range of different demands. You know, the kid that's catering for their mum or dad at home or a brother or sister, you know, they just can't dump them. They would need that. The first thing you would need to do is to put in additional care so that the kid, there's time to release the kid to be able to go to, you know, a Jim McCall school or whatever. But it can be done. It's no rocket science. We know what needs to be done. We're just not doing it at scale. Yeah,
but I think the answer is it would take at least 5 years to see any impact and probably 10 years to see.
Before you saw the long... And in fact, actually, I mean, one of the things I sponsored as a health secretary was the what's called the family nurse partnership in the health service, and this was for teenagers who were pregnant, and they got wrapped round support. If they had their partner with them, they also got support, and it wasn't just dealing with the health of the mother and the baby. For example, if the partner wasn't in training or employment, we brought in the agencies to try and help them get training or employment because we recognise the importance of work to the success of this family sticking together and being able the child to grow up without living in poverty and with decent health and all the rest of it. And that was that, and it's still going in many parts of Scotland. But that was a very successful programme. But you needed to join up the services so they worked as a team instead of, you know, having to knock and 20 different doors to get the support you needed. So there are things that can be done, and things that have been done and things that are being done. We're just not doing them at the scale required.
Do you think, the reason I was saying the 5 to 10 years, if that's the sort of expected time to get any project, regardless of what it is, to a successful conclusion or an impact, right? Is that maybe why a lot of politicians don't really bother about them? Because they see, well, I've got a 5-year cycle here.
No, I don't think they think like that. But the problem is life changes very quickly. I mean, one of the things that's happened in the last few years in Westminster in particular highlighted this. In the last 5 or 6 years, we've had 6 prime ministers. We've had, I think it's 10 ministers of education at UK level, and so on and so forth. Now, no minister can go in and make changes. And, no matter how good the minister is, if you're not in the job for more than 2 or 3 years, you're not going to be able to make much of an impact. And you've also got to take control of the civil service, because very often they are a force for conservatism with a small c. They don't like change. And I mean, I remember I wanted to reduce the years that children who were deaf or hard of hearing had to wait for cochlear ear implants from 8 years to 2. And there were elements within the civil service who were not happy at that. It only cost £8 million a year to do it. And years later, I was sitting in a restaurant in Glasgow and a guy came up to me and he said, "Mr. Neil, I want to thank you." And I said, "What for?" I'd never seen this guy in my life before. He said, "Well, when the cochlear ear implants were getting renewed every 7 or 8 years, my son was always called the dunce of the school." He says, "Since you made that change and it's gone to every 2 years, he's actually graduating this year from Strathclyde University." So a simple thing like that, renewing cochlear ear implants for deaf and hard of hearing children from 8 years down to 2 years, and he made the point, it's not just transformed his life, it's transformed the life of the whole family.
100%. That story alone.
That makes politics worthwhile.
Well, that's
when
what
that
I'm going
happens.
to say to you, Alex. I've got stories, with 17 years as a kids coach with so many kids, that you just, one story like that, that one story would probably make all that service you gave, public service you gave, worthwhile.
I mean, if I never achieved anything else, and hopefully I have, but if I never achieved anything else, that one thing made it all worthwhile.
Isn't it incredible?
Yes.
And that's proper change. But just a couple of things I'm curious that I've got thoughts on, that a man with your experience would be able to say, yeah, you're right or wrong, Craig. And we're both looking at this from different angles, so it'll be interesting to hear your opinion. My politics and involvement in politics as a normal person was probably 2 things would get my interest, and that would be a run-up to an election, whether that was Holyrood or Westminster, or those dreaded few weeks before a budget. When I used to smoke, and I don't drink as much now, but I used to light a bottle of whiskey, and I would be worrying shitless what the government were going to put up on my fags, my whiskey and my petrol, because that's the 3 things that they always do. So that was me. And I kind of think that is normal. That's where the majority of people probably are. You and I talking about politics a lot is probably in a really small minority. However, something changed. And in my mind, it changed in 2014. And before that, you would go and vote. Very, very few people would ask you how you voted. And if it would be your wife when you got home or a couple of pals at work. But even if you went, well, I voted Tory and you voted Labour, or I voted Labour and you voted Lib Dem, that would be, all right, what'd you do that for? And that'd be it.
Aye.
But something changed in 2014. And I think the referendum possibly done that, right? I don't think Unionists won the referendum, by the way. Now, that's a bizarre statement, eh?
Why do you say that?
Because I don't think there's enough. And I don't think there's enough independents, nationalists, whatever you want to brand them, to win either. I think the majority of your country, or at least a big enough chunk to be the kingmakers in the whole thing, would neither identify as a nationalist nor a unionist, right? Because I don't need to ask you how you voted in 2014. You don't need to ask me. But there's a load of people that you kind of would, right? And I think it's them that won the referendum.
Can I say, let's go back 20 years before the independence referendum. And we had the devolution referendum in 1979. And the devolution referendum was much closer. Now, it wasn't implemented because of the 40% rule, but let's forget that. But it was a very, very, relatively speaking, a very narrow majority of people voted for a devolved parliament. 20 years later, then it was still a fairly narrow majority but to stay in the Union. But clearly people had changed their opinion because we had a second devolution referendum in 1997 and it was overwhelmingly, as John Smith said, it was clearly the settled will of the Scottish people that they wanted a devolved parliament. Yeah. And I suspect, and I hope obviously, that the same will happen with independence, that the second referendum, if we have one, the second referendum, I hope, would be won decisively. And I say that for two reasons. Number one...
Either way.
Well, either way, yes. But I mean, I'm for independence. But I recognise that in independent Scotland, if we voted for independence, we got off a far better start if nearer 60% of the folk voted for it rather than 51%. And I think one of the things we've seen with the Brexit referendum is that when you end up with a narrow result, a lot of folk just won't accept the result as a permanent position. So I think it's in everybody's interest, because you think about it, supposing the Scottish people do vote, if we have a second referendum, for independence, which obviously I hope they do. I'm going to say to you, knowing that you're a unionist, that I still want you to be staying in Scotland. I still want you to be running your podcast. I still want you to be controversial. I still want you to still want you to, live in Scotland and contribute to Scotland and all the rest of it. And I think in the same way that, I'm sure the Unionists would say, well, the 45% who voted for independence, we don't want them to leave Scotland because they lost the referendum. So that's where I go back to this point about any society, whether it's an independent Scotland or a devolved Scotland, whether it's England or Wales or Northern Ireland or Trump's America, at the end of the day, if it's going to be a democracy, then people have to come together at some point, not on every issue and not to agree on everything, but to have a way of operating a democracy, exercising democracy. And there has to be sometimes a bit of compromise, so on and so forth. So a lot of things a lot of people agree on that they don't realise they agree on. But at the end of the day, whether it's, if there's another referendum, I pray that obviously we get an independence majority, but I pray that we get a big enough majority that says, no, we're going to be able to make this work. And I also pray that the people who will vote no, who might be around 40, 45%, whatever the figure is, that those people decide to stay in Scotland and contribute to Scotland, and let's get on with it and work together for the benefit of the country.
No, that's warming, and it's I think that's sensible, and it makes sense to me. But the point about going back to 2014 was, when I was this normal guy who would just go and vote, and I'd get interested in politics 2 weeks before I had to vote, and the day before a budget. And I kind of think that's normal, right? We now live in a society where everybody demands to know every single political view you've got on every single thing. And it's chaos, right? Now, I think, and I'm looking for your opinion on it, more learned opinion than mine, I think the timing of that coincided exactly with the referendum. And I was like, this is a bit bonkers, that everybody demanded to know how everybody else was voting. And I'll be honest with you, I've got family members that I've kind of not spoke to for over 10 years because of it. And at that point, I was very busy doing other things. I was involved in a campaign for Rangers Football Club because I believed we had bad owners at the time, and I spent 3 years campaigning for that, and that coincided with the referendum. So it's not as if I was out in George Square or campaigning or I was doing nothing bar, saying a few things on social media, like when folk demanded to know how. And that led to me having breakdowns in relationships. People that I worked with, that I had great dealings with, people that I'd really got on with, that I've just not spoke to. And I don't think that's particularly healthy. But even so since that point, though, I even get folk demanding what I wanted. How do you feel about Israel-Palestine war? How do you feel about Trump? And I'm like, I'll tell you if you want, but is it that important? Right, and then you go, well, what about this? And it's the other thing that I think has happened through an evolution since 2014 is, and this might be social media's fault, you're not allowed middle ground. Everybody's got to pick a side, and you've got to be polar ingrained in both, in either camp. Am I right? Am I wrong? What's your views on that? Has the perception in the political arguing like this in the public changed, or am I just...
Well, I certainly think certain social media outlets encourage that, and these so-called logarithms, where if you're identified in one camp or another, and whatever the issue is, then you get bombarded with certain types, and it's control. It's controlled by this invisible hand called the logarithm, which of course, the logarithm is designed and developed by the people in charge of the social media outlets, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, or whatever. Yeah. So I do think we need to have a fundamental look, because I think there are two. I think there are two things. If you look at Trump's America, two things I think are causing and reinforcing the divisions in America. And I used to live in America. I like America. I like Americans. And it's a very dynamic country. But the divisive nature of Trump's politics, it's not his politics actually, it's some of the statements he makes, calling Joe Biden Sleepy Joe and all that sort of stuff. I mean, really? We can surely conduct ourselves at a much higher standard than that. And there's a wee bit of that creeping into British politics as well, and I hope we avoid it at all costs. You don't need to insult the other guy because he disagrees with you. You don't need to fall out with him because he disagrees with you. And the second thing is, I do think we need to regulate social media much more than we're doing, because I think it can. The power of social media now can manipulate society in a way that even the newspapers 50 years ago couldn't do it. And I think, we need to stand back a bit and have a fundamental look. I mean, for example, the campaign on the impact, the Molly Russell case, where a young lassie of 14 or 15 committed suicide because of what was in social media. In a civilised society, nobody has a right to distribute that stuff to young folk that's going to lead to suicide.
Yeah. No, I think that's horrific. But I get what you're saying, but I think the wee box that sat in the corner of our living room for since the 50s and the newspapers had the same effect, if
possibly.
Not because we now, at least now when you see something on social media, the majority of people who want to will go, but is that true? Whereas before we had social media, if it was presented to us in a newspaper or that wee box in the corner, we just believed it. So I think, there's probably a double-edged sword, that one. And I think, yes, if whoever controls that social media platform will get to dictate the narrative.
I think we need a fundamental debate about how do we protect the whole principle of democracy in tomorrow's world. Because democracy isn't just about voting once every 5 years. It's about the right to speak out, the right to disagree, the right not to disagree. It's also the right not to be bombarded with monopoly organisations controlling the newspapers or monopoly organisations controlling social media. So there's a broad discussion to be had on how do we reinforce the principles of democracy given the society we're now living in and looking to the future when we get artificial intelligence. How do we make sure that that's not manipulated? A sort of modern way of... If you look at how, for example, in the extreme case, Hitler managed to mobilise the fascist movement in Germany. Now, that was through a combination of illegally seizing power and a whole range of other things. But once he got a grip and he controlled the media and all the rest of it, folks started to believe what he was saying and doing. Now, we won't, and clearly nobody would defend that, I would hope. But in a way, I'm not in any way saying they're fascist or anything like that. That's crazy. But so the power of social media, for example, in our society, I think is eroding the principles of democracy in a number of ways. And we as a society need to regain control. We should regulate social media in the same way that we regulate monopolies in any business, so they can manipulate the market. And I think, if you look at the people who control, Zuckerberg controls Facebook, and he controls Meta, and he controls not TikTok, but some of the other social media platforms. No one person should have that amount of power.
But we've always started with the media, though, have we not? It's not been one person.
I agree.
I
think we should have stricter laws in the great days of when newspapers were powerful. I think we should have stricter laws so that, one or two people couldn't control the entire newspaper industry. Mm-hmm. We allowed that to happen, and I think it did adversely affect the quality of our democracy. So it's not a new challenge. The technology is new, but it's not a new challenge. But I don't think we've faced up to the challenge. We need to face up to the challenge.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great point. It's a great point, and it's not new.
No.
But just because we never dealt with it when it was newspapers and TV, does that mean we shouldn't deal with it?
But it's now done on a scale and in a way, clearly a lot of people didn't buy newspapers even when newspapers were at their height. Mm. But you can't avoid social media in today's world. You just can't avoid it. And it's all its different forms, because it's now got a lot of forms. And if AI is put on top of that, then, I think we could be endangering ourselves. Mm. And I think we really need to give this much more thought than we've done. And I'm not just talking about Scotland, I'm talking about civilization needs to look at it, because it's a potential threat to our way of civilization.
Mm-hmm. No, AI scares me. I think it might be a sign of getting old right enough, because it maybe when scared me when I was 20. So that, I've got to factor that in. But just because of how untapped it could be, and how, if you can design something to teach itself, then where does man control this thing that man's built?
Well, that's one of the questions. Some of these AI experts think AI will take over, and others say, no, that's a load of rubbish. They can't take over. The human mind is supreme, and we don't know. But we need to start addressing these issues. Not just thinking about them. We need to address them.
Mm. No, it's been a great chat. I've really enjoyed this. But how do we fix Scotland?
Make you First Minister.
That'd be fun, wouldn't it? Probably the first Minister to get the jail. Wouldn't be the first one to deserve it.
I should add, I'm joking.
No, I think...
I think there's loads of things that could be done, not just by the Scottish Parliament, Scottish Government. There's loads of things local authorities can do, loads of things a load of other people can do, business can do to fix Scotland.
One last thing I want to ask you about, and this is more advice probably than anything else, because I've got this other mad notion. When you run a country, you really only have one source of income. It's not like a business that, you sell cigarettes or a newsagent, but if you sell comics, and so one goes up, one goes down. Your kind of only income is coming from tax. Now, whether that's income tax or corporation tax or tax on whatever, so you need to take money off people, right? And then you spend it, and you try to break even. When do we stop and say, are we getting good value? Because my view is, I want to ask your opinion on it, is at one point we never spent anything, and then we know we need national health, that makes sense, let's have one of that. What about free this and do that and this, and if it just gets the actual outgoings of this entity just gets bigger and bigger and bigger every year, and nobody actually ever says not stopping things, because that's a different question. But actually, are we getting best value? Because what I see loads of things in Scotland that could be doing with some money. Yeah. Whether that's roads or health service or housing, how we deal with people with addiction problems. There's all these things, and everybody needs to shout, and can I get more money, right? But if we want more money, we kind of need to bring our income up. But when do we say stop now? Well, let's look at what we're doing now and see if we're getting good value.
I think we should, at the moment, the level of tax in the UK is the highest it's ever been as a percentage of since the war, as a percentage of the total income. Mm-hmm. And I'm picking up from people who have never ever complained about paying tax in the past, but they feel as though it's now getting to the stage where certain taxes and tax overall is becoming excessive. And I'm not talking about the rich folk, I'm talking about ordinary punters. For example, if you are a pensioner and you get the state pension of roughly 11 grand a year, and you've got a company pension of 5 grand a year, you now get taxed in that, anything above total income of 12,500, you get taxed on it, and that's going to be the case till at least 2029. I don't think that's sustainable, quite frankly. So I think a lot of people, including relatively low-income people who are now caught in the tax bracket, are starting to say, well, wait a minute, we're paying all this tax, and what are we getting for it? Now, they're happy to pay tax provided we're getting a good health service. They're happy to pay tax provided the Waynes are getting a decent education. They're happy to pay tax to help prevent child poverty and all the rest of it. But when you're starting to pay tax, and north of the border, you're wasting £400 million on ferries through sheer incompetence. And south of the border, you're spending £100 million as part of HS2 for a bat tunnel to protect bats. That's what it was, £100 million. I think it's time that the politicians woke up and the civil service, and particularly Her Majesty's Treasury, woke up and said, you can't build a consensus to pay more tax for increased defence and all the rest of it if we continually see examples of good money chasing bad money, and this level of incompetence, north and south of the border. I mean, Alex Salmond, to be honest, if Alex Salmond had been there, this ferry fiasco would never have happened, quite frankly. So it goes right to the top, and the folk, I think, are getting to the point of starting to get rebellious about the level of tax they're paying, and it's driven in part by the amount of waste they see and inefficiency and incompetence. So I think there needs to be a wake-up call to both senior politicians as well as to the civil service and to local government, as well, to make sure that we not only spend the money more wisely, that we're seen to be spending the money more wisely. I mean, another example is we don't spend enough on investment in this country. Most successful economies spend 25% of their income every year on investment. We in the UK only spend about 18% on investment, and it shows. That's why we've got potholes. That's why we haven't dualled the A9 and the A96 when we should have done, and all the rest of it. But it's not enough just to say we're going to increase the level of investment. If you look at the cost per mile of new railways in Spain or China or Japan, and the cost of new roads per mile in France or Germany or elsewhere, we're amongst the most expensive because we're not doing it efficiently. We're wasting a lot of money. If you look at HS2 again, a recent study has shown that a lot of the contractors have wasted money, but the public sector's just recompensed them and paid it up without question. So we need needs to be addressed.
That's what I'm saying. It's not stopping things. We're getting value for money.
Exactly.
Because if
there's Americans say a bigger bang for the buck.
That's that. Because when I was working for other people and they'd pay me to look after their business or parts of their business, right?
Absolutely.
I would look at two things: income and outgoings. Now, if I wanted to make them £1,000 a week better, I could either sell more or save.
That's right.
And I always looked at both lines, but we don't.
No, you need to offer value.
We need more money.
And the danger is, particularly if the Chancellor is going to try and increase taxes again by another 40 billion, and of course the last time it was the wrong taxes that she put up, by the way.
Can I ask you one last question? And this is really, I think, probably the best one I'm going to ask you, right? Hope you agree. You were a minister in the Scottish Parliament. You've already told us stories with you when you were doing the health job, where you've brought in other people, dealt with people, found common ground for the better of Scotland, right? Alex Salmond, we already had this conversation. In 2014, I really didn't like the man for two reasons. One, he nearly took away something that I hold dear. And two, as I've already explained, I wasn't really into politics at the time. But what I've found out since was he'd done all right with a minority government. Now, I don't know if that was why he done all right, because he had people like you that were quite happy to talk to this guy with a blue rosette and this guy with a red rosette and find commonality and do good things. But he's did. And I don't need to be an expert in politics to look back and say that term, pre-referendum, Scotland was getting managed better than after referendum.
I agree with you. I think that's the best government. Salmon's government is by far the best, most effective government. Got some things wrong, but overall, it's the best government Scotland has had since the Scottish Parliament was created. And I'm not saying that just because I was in it. I think the last 10 years have been downhill in terms of performance and really disappointing. Promises made and not kept on not just another referendum, but in education and health and housing.
Judgment in education.
Exactly.
Okay, you failed.
And to be honest, before that, Donald Dewar only lived a year as First Minister. But to be fair, Henry McLeish delivered free personal care, so he deserves credit for that. Jack McConnell delivered the smoking ban, and Jack deserves credit for that. But Alex's list of achievements far, far outstrips any other First Minister's list of achievements. And because he managed to get a referendum, which looked as though politically it was a very difficult thing to do, and because he came so close to achieving the objective, I think he will be the one the history books will judge to have been, during this period of Scotland's history, the outstanding First Minister.
Now, is that simply just down to personalities?
No, it was a level of competence. The other thing about him was he'd been round the houses. He'd been a civil servant. He had worked for the Royal Bank of Scotland. So he knew what he was doing. One of the problems in all the parties just now is, I think you need a balance of youth and experience. But there's too many people, even who are in their 30s and 40s, have now started life, done a university degree, become a researcher for a parliamentarian, then become a parliamentarian, then become a junior minister, and then become a cabinet minister, and they've never been round the block, and they have no new ideas or no vision and no agenda to change Scotland or in the UK, same down in Westminster, to change the UK for the better. The quality of politician today, when I started off, I used to go in and out of Downing Street when I worked for the Labour Party and Harold Wilson was Prime Minister, Privy Council Office. I worked closely with a guy called Ted Short, who was the Deputy Prime Minister under Wilson, on devolution. And I used to go to meetings of the Home Policy Committee of the Labour Party, chaired by Tony Benn. And, you had people like Shirley Williams, you had people like Barbara Castle, Wilson himself, Jim Callaghan, Roy J. Everyone top notch. Everyone. And I look at the front benches. Stammer couldn't lace Wilson's boots. Rachel Reeves, I don't think she might be from accounts, she's certainly not from the economics department. And I look at that Labour cabinet and how poor it is compared to Wilson's cabinet. And I look at the Tory lot. And it's the same in Scotland. Quite frankly, in the first 25 years of the Scottish Parliament, Salmon's period as First Minister was when it peaked, in terms of performance, in terms of ability, in terms of running the country generally. Yeah. I have to say also, if Donald Dewar had lived, then Donald, although obviously he wouldn't have had an independence referendum, but Donald was capable of doing a lot of good things, and had he lived, would have done them, but he never got the chance because he died prematurely.
Yeah, and I think just to finish off on one last point.
This is the third time I've been finishing off, by the way. Obviously you didn't do maths in school, Craig.
I did. But then I done sales and I knew how to manipulate them. So he's through me now. I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah, so we've got a parliament in Westminster. It's got 650 people in it. And unfortunately not 650 good ones. We can't even fill a government with good ones, as you've just described. So if we can't fill a Westminster with 650 good ones, with Scotland having less than 10% of the population, what chance have we got of filling 135 in Holyrood? Do we have too many?
I don't think it is a numbers thing. If you look at the small countries, let me answer this more generally. Every year, the United Nations publishes two tables. One is of the richest countries in the world, measured by GDP per head, and another one is called the Happiness Index.
All right.
So it includes the GDP, but it also includes education performance, health services, and the like. If you look back in the 30 or so years that these have been going, happiness has only been going about 15 or 20 years, I think. But 8 out of the 10 in the 8 out of the 10 richest countries in terms of GDP per head are always small countries. So you've got Luxembourg is always there. Norway is always there. Sweden is usually there. Denmark, Finland, Switzerland, Singapore. These are all very often there or thereabouts in these charts. When you go to the happiness one, because a country that's rich, unless it makes a complete mess of things, is usually the happiest as well. Because if you're rich, you can afford a better education system, better health, better housing, and all the rest of it. And the same again, usually 8 out of the 10 are small countries. So how is it all these small countries can be the rich, some of them with no natural resources like Scotland, can be the richest country? It tells me they're being governed. There's a separate measurement of government as well, which is measured on the lowest level of corruption, highest performance, all that kind of thing. And they're top of those lists as well.
And are these
so small countries can attract the talent necessary to achieve success.
Point, though, right? What I'm saying is we can't get 650 in Westminster. Right, and we as a nation are about 8%, 9%, right? So I'd say 10% because it's easy to talk. So should we have 65 people running Holyrood? Because that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying we should run, but I'm saying if we have wet Holyrood, if we get too many people, there's the expectation that we find.
If anything at Holyrood, because you've got such a wide range of responsibilities, and we've only got 129 MSPs. Sometimes we don't have the folk to chair the committees and all that. And we could be doing with possibly slightly higher numbers, but I'm not advocating that. I don't think it's a numbers game. I think we need to make politics much more attractive, and I think we are losing good people who potentially might become, would be interested in becoming politicians either in Edinburgh or Westminster because, for example, of social media and the intrusion in your private life. And then the minute your wages go up, everybody moans and groans because they want us to do it for nothing. Because if you do it for nothing, you'll get the lowest. No many folk can afford to do it for nothing. So I think it's not about money, actually. I think primarily, I think it's mainly about the attractiveness of the job. Particularly if you've got a young family, it's very difficult. I mean, Kate Forbes has found that out because she lives in the north of Scotland, and even although it's a minister, she has a government car to take her down to Edinburgh and stuff like that. She's got a 3-year-old kid, and it's not easy being a mother or father and being a politician. So there's a whole host of reasons. If you go to Norway and places like that, politicians are just like every other family. They've got access to the best childcare in Europe. So that's a plus factor. So it's quite easy to be a politician in Norway or Denmark.
Yeah, I'm going out there soon, going to do a wee trip, Denmark and Sweden, to look at some interest. Well, Alex, it's been fantastic talking to you.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Our second cup leather, I'm sure, and I hope it's not the last. I think something to be bent. I kind of thought we were going to be split more on the first topic, but we seem to be heavier on the second topic, which is politics.
I can see you voted for independence yet.
I can see you voting for me to be first minister. But I think, listen, and it goes with what I'm saying. It's to make Scotland's not right just now, and we can talk. Just one thing. See, when something goes wrong,
the world's not right 100%. Just now. When you see what's happening in Gaza.
See, when I was a manager, when I was young, I was terrible. See, when there was a fault, I wanted to apportion blame and then maybe try and fix it. What I've learned in later life is you might want to apportion blame down the road. Can we fix the problem first? And I kind of think that's what we need to take into Scotland.
And I think the media has a lot to answer for in that as well. I think some politicians do as well, but I think we've all got to rise above it.
Well, it's been a pleasure, a privilege and an honour interviewing you, sir. And I hope it's not the last time we speak. I'm sure it won't be. Now that you've got my right phone number and I'll maybe get my all run back. So there we go, folks. What a fascinating conversation with a man who, regardless of your agrees with politics or not, I think there's probably only one thing anybody would want to potentially disagree with, and that's the constitutional question of Scotland. Everything else is common sense and logic, and I keep saying that's the most important thing. So a great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want other people to see this debate and conversation, you see it's a debate, we're only arguing points, this conversation, click the thumbs up, put your comments below and hit the share button and send it to your friends and family. If you've not already done so, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notifications bell But the most important thing of all of this is, unless you are the type of person that for some reason doesn't want to take the responsibilities of your job and govern the country, whatever you determine as your country, Scotland or United Kingdom, Holyrood or Westminster, then not you. But everyone else, have a great day. Cheery bye now. That was brilliant. I enjoyed that.
Good.